Okay. So yeah, last time we ended with this paragraph 25.
Yeah.
Necessity is fourfold. It is intrinsic or extrinsic, and in each of the two cases it can be either good or evil. Examples of intrinsic necessity, if good are the will of God and of the just man, if evil, the choice of the wicked man, of
Mhm.
extrinsic beneficent necessity, the force of fate as it bestows on us things that are primarily good, and of the harmful kind, its gifts of the violent, the abnormal, and the destructive. Um, so I mean, we ended like we had to cut off the middle of the discussion here, I remember. You had brought up the question about whether it was six factors if we took into account choice, or eight factors, and also whether there really is choice because you're either following your like a good your if you're a good person, then you're following like the will of God or the just man, and that's a kind of necessity here. And I said, well, in moral training, you're still choosing, and it's not necessary.
Mhm.
Do you have any leftover questions, or shall we go on?
No, this is just about if I can like remind myself of the context. This is all to explain what Socrates says that um, suicide is good if there's a kind of necessity,
Yeah.
which shows
And
us that that's what the God wants, and that's why it doesn't transgress his explanation that we belong to the God. Um,
yeah, and
and
and this
this is in order to
complement
explain what?
and this complements, I guess, paragraph 22. So what's translated as compulsion there is the same word as that's translated as necessity here. So there, Proclus had said that the only kind of necessity or compulsion that is forgivable, right, or that is understandable, is that of the of God's will or the just man, right? And that's the first kind of necessity here. It's good intrinsic necessity. But then Damascus says possibly any kind, and
Mhm.
these other four are perhaps or these other three of the four fill that out. So you can imagine um, necessity being of someone killing themselves because of an evil character that they developed through their choices, or through, although then external necessity, it's less clear how it's going to be, we can understand external necessity causing death because external things, just kill us. But how external necessity can force us to kill ourselves, that's a bit less clear, although there are, cases of someone, say, I don't know, someone can threaten to kill your family if you don't kill yourself or something like that. Or otherwise, yeah, like also that doesn't need to be a person, it can be like a falling tree. It threatens to kill your family if you don't throw yourself and push them away. Um, so in that sense, I guess that would be a um, killing yourself out of extrinsic necessity, maybe. Um, Although even then, you'd say, well, wanting to save your family is part of a good person's will, and so that would be intrinsic. Um, but in any case, yeah, 25 fills out
Oh,
22.
so yeah. So the main like upshot of this interpretation is that it changes necessity into choice because um, like you would have thought that when Socrates says you can't kill yourself unless you are somehow forced or indicated, it's a kind of excuse, like it's a right that would the word that we translate
Mm,
as forgiveness or something. It's something where you could understand someone doing something bad because of it's being forced and not willed. And it turns out that it really means the opposite, that the kind of necessity that a good person that affects a good person is the one which is a precisely that he notices that it's good and he's like forced, so to speak, or to do the good.
Yeah, yeah, I guess you can say that. Um, it's yeah, there's something counterintuitive in calling the the will of the good man as necessary, but I guess that's um yeah, but that might be in the Platonic text. Like if Socrates is saying I have to do this, in what sense does he have to do that? You know, if he really had the chance of running away, right?
Right,
Which
right.
is,
It's
yeah.
like again, if we
Um,
think of randomly yesterday, I opened an Aristotle discussion of choice in like book three, I think, of the Ethics, and it has like a sentence there where it says that, oh, if we call people doing the good because I think it's good necessary, then there's no choice anywhere, something like that. And he thinks that it's absurd to call something like that a compulsion, because
uh,
that's precisely what we mean when we say choice, basically. Uh,
right, I see. I see.
it's
Yeah.
like,
So Plato is famously, I mean, he is more loose with this, with necessity, and especially in the Republic, it seems that he, you know, how do you force people to turn their heads around, right? How do you set free the prisoners of the cave? And it seems, and also like he talks about forcing the people, the wise people to come and, rule the city. And um, and one interpretation I've seen of this is that, um, Plato often talks about desire, about eros, as being something that necessitates things. And that's a plausible way of explaining that, right? It's not that he thinks you should actually threaten these people, but you should somehow entice them, make them fall in love with philosophy or with doing good for other people and things like that. And in desire, you're somehow led by things that you didn't choose, and so that's a kind of necessity. Um, so Plato I think, has um, a wider use of necessity than Aristotle. It's also like the questions, yeah, and like, of course, there are easy cases, like there are many cases where you'd say, oh, if it's necessary, it's not a choice, and Aristotle seems to have the better argument here, but you think about like a marriage, right? A wedding ceremony. And then, like, do you take this person to be your spouse? And there's something awful if you say, oh, that person was completely free to say no at that point. It's like, I thought she loved me. On the other hand, that has to be free. Otherwise, like, what's the point? Like, you also think that, like, you're being manipulated or something. That's also not what you want. And it seems that there, the necessity and choice have to somehow align, right? And that would be a
right,
case.
right. Or in other words, there is a tension between we want to say that good actions are ones that have good reasons, and reasons are a kind of force, and then we want to say that they're
Compelling.
free, but freedom, being free and doing things that make sense, are in some kind of tension always, unless you're like an absurdist, which says the only true choice is one that makes no sense, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And we also have this experience of, oh, well, what are you thanking me for? I had to do that. Something like that. Okay.
Okay. No,
Um,
so it seemed like Aristotle's whole discussion is like to get out of this kind of calling these kind of things necessities. Like, yeah, every choice is basically that. So when we talk about necessity as something like excuses a moral failure or something like that, we just mean we can't mean that. We mean something that doesn't come from you or something like that.
right, right. So this necessity would not be an excuse, it would be a reason. Yeah. Okay, so now we're moving to a new section of the text. So let me share first the translation from the Cooper thing. Okay, so Socrates just presented the argument against suicide, and Simmias and Cebes have questions, right? So, one moment. Okay, so the text continues. That seems likely, said Cebes. As for what you were saying, that philosophers should be willing and ready to die, that seems strange, right? So Socrates' argument for why you shouldn't kill yourself has made the other thing that he said, that philosophers should want to die, odd. If what we said just now is reasonable, namely that a god is our protector and we are his possessions, it is not logical that the wisest of men should not resent leaving this service in which they are governed by the best of masters, the gods. For a wise man cannot believe that he will look after himself better when he is free. A foolish man might easily think so, that he must escape from his master. He would not reflect that one must not escape from a good master, but stay with him as long as possible, because it would be foolish to escape. But the sensible man would want always to remain with the one better than himself. So, Socrates, the opposite of what was said before is likely to be true. The wise would resent dying, whereas the foolish would rejoice at it. I thought that when Socrates heard this, he was pleased by Cebes' argumentation. Glancing at us, he said, Cebes is always on the track of some arguments. He is certainly not willing to be at once convinced by what one says. Said Simmias, but actually, Socrates, I think myself that Cebes has a point now. Why should truly wise men want to avoid the service of masters better than themselves and leave them easily? And I think Cebes is aiming his argument at you because you are bearing leaving us so lightly and leaving those good masters, as you say yourself, the gods. So there are a couple of questions here that will catch the eye of the Neoplatonic interpreters. One is that you see that he uses both a god is our protector, and later the best of masters, the gods, right? So that brings up the question of the monad and the multiplicity again. So what, and also which argument is he dealing with? Is he answering the esoteric or the exoteric argument, since they distinguish two arguments? There are also also brings in, this new question about escaping your master, which is like a slave escaping their master. And I guess part of the background here too, I mean, the reception is this idea, the justification of slavery is typically that the slave, like from Aristotle, is that the slave cannot, has an impaired rational faculty, so he has to serve others who have, fully formed rational faculties. And that's not fully spelled out here, but there's an idea that, you can have a bad master, and that would be one which is worse than you. And so if you followed him, then you'd be worse off. But if you have a good master, one that is better than you, more rational to you, you should stay with them, right? As a cultural aside, just as a digression, I'm reminded of, like, if you look at ancient astrological texts. There are many centuries after this, but the Neoplatonists would know these techniques. They have techniques for judging, like, oh, I want to leave my master, or I have a possibility of changing masters. Is the new master going to be better or not? And ancient astrologers have rules to how to figure this out. Um, and
Mm.
there's a bit of moral also commentary here when he says, I thought that when Socrates heard this, he was pleased by Cebes' argumentation. So, and he says these nice things. So that's like a moral bit about, like, oh, Plato's telling us something about how do you argue well, and what should you and what's the ideal kind of student. And then there's also then the Simmias also then brings this to bear directly on Socrates, whereas Cebes had just formulated it in a general way. Okay, so this is what we'll be doing now. We might also do the next section while in this class. We'll see how far we get.
Okay.
Okay, so do you want to
Yeah, I'm
continue with
back here
26?
in 26. Okay. So, questions raised by Cebes and Simmias. Cebes expresses his difficulty 26. Cebes expresses his difficulty in the form of a syllogism from contradictory premises. The philosopher wants to run away from from the gods. A man who wants to away from the gods is not a philosopher. Therefore, the philosopher is not a philosopher. That's a, I mean, he said something about a foolish man, and
Yeah, he said that a foolish man would that a person who wants to run away from the gods is a foolish man, and so he's replaced that with is not a philosopher. Yeah,
okay. So this is the question. The question is something like that this, whatever the reason for not committing suicide is, it's in tension with whatever the reason for wanting to die is.
yeah,
Um, Now, 27. The flaws in Cebes' argument are first, that he fails to define what kind of death the philosopher is willing to die. That's one issue. Secondly, that he forgets that in Hades too, there are gods who are good masters to us and who either are superior to those here or exert superior powers. Okay.
right.
So,
So
yeah, I don't know what the first thing is, what kind of death.
right. So that would be the philosopher wants to run away from the gods. So um, is is the death that the philosopher is willing to die one
Hmm.
that goes against the god's will? Is he running away from them? I guess that is the question. And that
Hmm.
bears on the idea that of the necessity, because the necessity is imposed by the gods and indicated by them somehow, right? Um, and so that would be the first flaw. That he hasn't taken into account that there's different ways of committing suicide or wanting to die, right?
Okay.
Um, and also, there's the question about, well, there are many gods, right? So if you can run away from some gods and go to others, which might even be better, right? And then that would be a case of the wise man who runs from a bad master or a less good master to a better master.
Right. Okay. That would work somehow with the idea that whatever God is in control here is the one responsible for more divided things, and therefore it's worse. And so, in some sense, it's good to escape to the higher God, right?
Exactly. The higher
Works better.
God would be one who takes care of the soul more directly instead of creating our bodies. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We do know. I do need to know how. Okay, we'll see. 28. Cebes speaks both of God and gods, imitating the two arguments of Socrates, the exoteric and the esoteric. Okay. Right one is the God, and the one and the many one. Or rather, he's trying to, so this is someone reacting, he's trying to improve the exoteric argument, which also has a monad as its starting point, as we remarked before. For his objection evidently concerns the second argument.
Right. So this is a debate between Proclus and Damascus about interpreting what CB said. Proclus says that he uses God and gods because he's pointing to both the exoteric argument that has the multitude of the gods as its starting point. We are the gods' possessions, they are our guardians, and also the esoteric one, which is just about the monad of these gods. Um, but then Damascus thinks it's all about the exoteric argument, and he is trying to improve upon it. So the idea here would be that he is improving upon it by observing, that the exoteric also talks about a monad when he says uh, a god is our protector and we are his possessions. And indeed, we talked about how there has to be, because of the continuity of the two arguments, there has to be a monad and a multitude in both cases, right? That was especially in 15, right? If the exoteric accounts the development of the esoteric reason, just as the manifold is of its own monad, how can the occult reason still be so? And the answer was that, well, both of them have both, but one, both are taken esoterically, Dionysus and the Titans, and the other both are taken exoterically, right? So then it's Dionysus as the sun, or the sun as Dionysus, and the the Titans as the junior gods that make our body. So so much for what
Mm.
CB says. Um,
Okay. Um, okay, so let's understand. 29. It is the nature of all that exists to take care of their inferiors. But the gods have this function primarily and by their very subsistence. The reason is that every god is goodness, and providence is an activity of goodness, bringing about the good for that which is already good by its own being. Therefore, the gods are called the best rulers of all things that are. If they are the rulers of all things that are, they themselves must transcend being.
right. Let's right. So a thing about the just the Greek. So every god is goodness is like each god is a goodness. So we've talked about, especially when we're reading the elements, about how each god is a value, right? And then providence is an activity of goodness, right? Um, that bringing about the good, agathopoios, or no, I mean, there are different ways of construing this. It it's not necessarily for that which is already good by its own being. It could be providence. The providence of goodness is an activity of the things that are good by their own being to that makes other things good. So, because that would be weird the way he translated it. It would be that they only make things good that are things that are already good. But no. Um, and therefore they're called the best rulers of all things. So this is just recalling a bit primary goods, and therefore they're the primary things that make other things good. And this is brought in to strengthen CB's argument, right? So by the Neoplatonists' own lights and their own analysis of what a god is, then it's primarily a goodness that makes things good. So you should, want to be in the god's company as much time as possible.
Okay. And this, okay, let's, this is a reason not to die. Or, okay, now,
Yeah, not to
God's
want to
care,
die.
okay,
Yeah.
God's care of man's 30 care of man consists in making him better than he was. Okay. Man's care of God, where did we have such a thing? I don't know.
C2D4.
In allowing himself to be made better by him.
It's the service when you talk. Oh, it was translated as service before. It is not logical that the
Okay.
wisest men should resent leaving this service in which they are
Mm,
governed by the best of masters. Yeah.
okay.
Hmm. Yeah. So this is first Proclus's view, then probably Damascus. So Proclus thinks that the service of God is making man better than he was, right? And the service of man for God is just allowing himself to be made better by him. This is interesting. This would be probably like it's a question, right? Because this in Greek therapeue, it's also used for, like prayer and ritual and things, sacrifices. These are all service for the gods. And so it's a question about like what is the point of this? And here it seems to be, well, the point of all this is and there's, classic problem about the gods don't need anything, so what can we do for them? What kind of service can we do for the gods? And so the Brooklyn answers that, well, it's actually for us, right? It's for us to become more godlike.
Mm-hmm.
But then Damascus has a different idea.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, I keep on losing the page. Unless, okay, that's one explanation. That's like a simple explanation, I guess. Unless we could say that man perfects the God that is within him, and the transcendent God is so far as he calls, and the transcendent God is so far as he calls forth his providential, i.e., secondary activity for the benefit of himself and others.
Yeah, I think that is should be an
In, right?
insofar.
Insofar.
Yeah. So here he says that so this is like a correction of what man's care for God is, right? So he says that he perfects the God that is within him. So this can mean, for instance, the one of the soul, right? So the one of the soul is our participation in unity itself, and it is like what is divine in us. And insofar as it's something that's divine in us, then as we become better, then that part of us becomes more capable of acting, and that's and then the transcendent God, right? So not the God that is in us, but the transcendent God, we perfect him insofar as he calls forth his providential activity for the benefit of himself and others. So it's not just that we let him act on ourselves, but that we create conditions for him to act on others as well, right? So it's not just that in prayer, for instance, you put yourself in a position to be more receptive to um, uh, you know, the existence of the gods, but also, for instance, you create conditions for them to act more broadly in the world. So, like, you can think in a more immediate way, they make you better, and then therefore you help other people, and so you're letting them help other people. But it
Hmm.
can also be things like we read in Marinus's biography of, you create a ritual or a situation where the gods become present, and then they bring rain, right, for in a place that's suffering drought. So, and this can be called perfecting the transcendent God, not of course because he is changed, but because the conditions, not only yourself but other things here in the world become more receptive to the divine activity. Right. And so this is the service that we are in um, under the gods, right? When we say that we are their possessions, we're their slaves. So this is the kind of service we're doing for them. And again, makes more sense about why we shouldn't want to stop doing this.
Okay,
The idea is like, why do you want to die? When you die, you won't be able to pray to the gods and then help them act in the world. So, like, why do you want to die?
mhm. So here we have, okay. Um, uh, okay. Um, Here we do, there isn't really a difference in reality between these two interpretations. Like both of them agree of what's going on. It's a question of like what we call this worship or prayer or something like that.
And Damascus is drawing attention to more things, right? To more effects of this worship.
Mm,
And what's interesting is like they're taking this argument, this Simmias argument, very very seriously, and that seems to have to do with their valuation of theurgy, right? Because if you didn't think, that worship and prayer had this material, practical aspect of helping other people and helping and helping extend the God's providence, then you probably, this would these paragraphs 29 and 30 wouldn't be, very relevant. But it seems like once they've given more weight to these religious activities, then then wanting to die seems more problematic, right? If they were just more body denying and things.
Right. Okay. So in here we do have this like more language of perfecting the God, which is something that I remember
Yeah,
you don't like when people say about theurgy, or like Jewish Kabbalists like saying perfecting God. And here Damascus
yeah,
lets you say something like that.
he lets you say something like that. Yeah, yeah. I don't like it, but Damascus is letting you say that. Yeah.
Um, it's still what I'm saying is it's still an allowing, right? It's still, I mean, in some sense, still allowing yourself. It's just that it's in the first thing, it's allowing yourself, and but yourself also has some kind of God with you. So allowing yourself is also perfecting a God, or not, if not the God, that is really outside of this activity. Or it's in the sense that it's true for the transcendent God, it's in his providence, right? In his or like even you explain it by doing more things, but it's in other words, you're able to make it rain, or something like that, by being receptive, right? By becoming
Right, right. But I think yeah. But here it includes like making other things receptive as well.
mhm.
That's what the difference of the second. Yeah.
Right, but it wouldn't like transgress your like thing that
No,
the
no,
gods are
yeah,
active. Yeah.
yeah. No, no, it wouldn't transgress my things. It wouldn't transgress my concerns that the God is the one who's active. It wouldn't transgress also the concern that the God doesn't change. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so 31. Um, in the same way, where are we going here? In the same way as in the universe, the intelligence comes first after God or nous and reverts to him. So our own intelligence, aspires towards the God, to God, upwards to God, while unreason turns away from the divine.
So this is explaining the foolish person, right? The distinction between the wise person, and the foolish person. And again, we have Proclus's view and then Damascus's view. Proclus's view agrees with what he said before about what's titanic in us. Titanic is the irrational way of life, and the opposite, the divine way of life, is the rational one. And so he says, as nous, right, comes after the gods and reverts towards them. So our nous aspires to the god, and the irrational thing turns away from the gods. That's why the foolish man wants to escape the good master, right? And um, Damascus will enrich what this means by intelligence.
Okay. So by intelligence, we should understand not only its cognitive aspect, but the appetitive, I don't know how you say this word as well, both in the universe and in ourself. For the intelligence is both, being the first living being. Okay. I mean, that was true. I mean, you just said intelligence reverts towards him, which is an appetitive activity. Thus, we should no longer be troubled by the problem as to which is superior, appetitive or cognitive perfection. In other words, virtue or knowledge, since neither can be perfect without the other.
Right. So Damascus is not contradicting Proclus, he's just expanding him. And yeah, so Nous has and he's emphasizing that Nous has both. This is something that he does in many in many other texts. This is like something that was important to Damascus to emphasize that Nous is both cognitive and conative or appetitive as well. So appetitive, the stresses on pet. repetitive.
Okay.
Um, and so the and like Proclus sometimes Proclus does indeed separate the two more usually. So, for instance, he will talk about how we have nous or logos, sometimes he calls it, as the highest of all of our cognitive abilities, and zoe, life, vitality, is the highest of all of our cognitive or appetitive abilities and faculties, and then above both of them is the one of the soul, right? And Damascus seems to have a less divided anthropology, or not just like, but account of powers, where there aren't like powers of knowing and powers of willing, but there's at every stage there are powers that are both have a cognitive and a volitive aspect. Um,
Oh, this would be something like a question of is it greater or more important to love God or to know God or something like that?
exactly, exactly. And um, the yeah. And of course the mass saying neither. It's interesting that he says this. I mean, elsewhere he criticizes Proclus for emphasizing too much theurgy over virtue, but here's the opposition between virtue and knowledge. And yeah, I think that if between virtue and knowledge, Proclus would emphasize more virtue. And Damascus here is actually eh, defending knowledge more, I think. Hmm. That's
I mean,
interesting.
isn't the thing that these are like really, I'm not sure like what kind of appetite we're talking about. Like usually I would understand that these are just like two different kind of things that we call attraction or appetite. Like the attraction of the knower to the known or something is very different from is as true, or like I said, something like Aristotle would say it's as true, not as good, right?
Hmm.
Because
Oh,
knowledge
right.
wants there's like a wanting in knowledge, but it's wanting for truth. The wanting in the appetite is the wanting for good.
Right.
And you could call it no wanting if you want, but it's really has a different meaning.
Um, but on the other hand, wanting is supposed to be always analyzed in terms of good, right? So there's a question about like what do you mean of wanting for the truth? That's not a wanting for the good. So and in the case of nous, which is what they're talking about here about intelligence, so nous is classically for the good. Right? So, why does so Socrates reads Anaxagoras, Anaxagoras says nous rules everything, and so you expect, okay, so he's going to explain how everything is good, right? Because nous is always for the good. And he doesn't do that, Socrates is pointed. So here as well, the point is that, and yeah, so Proclus comes close to sometimes putting like will over knowledge, because, for instance, he will call the one of the soul our desire for unity, right? And of course, unity is the good, but unity is not knowing. And so that would be those would be like reasons to think that the appetitive is superior to the cognitive. But here he's um, emphasizing that there's both appetitive and um, uh, cognitive elements in nous. All right. So they have like different ways of understanding what the foolish person is doing. So the foolish person for um, Proclus, he has a cognitive difficulty, so um, he's not turns with his mind towards what is good, and so he acts away from he moves away from the gods, whereas Damascus, he thinks the foolish person doesn't just have a cognitive difficulty, he also has an appetitive one, a volitional one. Right? I guess that's the
Right.
discussion
But
here
it's
about that.
again like he's it's because he doesn't know or because you have a or I don't know. Since if all cognition or all nous is also a kind of appetite, then it's just the same thing.
Right, right. It doesn't seem to be like a real contradiction.
Okay. Now, 32. In what sense, okay, this is to explain the like master servant analogy. In what sense can the gods be called our masters? Now, a master does not seek the good of his servant, but his own. This is where he differs from a ruler. This is like Plato's thing with a
Yeah,
shepherd and stuff. Um,
exactly.
and what good can God receive through man? The explanation may be that in the case of the gods, the two functions run parallel. Not sure how.
Ma Master and ruler. Right.
Right. So like he has his own good and our good somehow. Um, Besides, even an earthly master looks after his slave, but for his own sake. His own meaning the slave's sake or
No, the masters.
the master's sake, as the Stoics say. And this holds true of the gods also. They do everything primarily for their own sake.
Right.
It is rather, so I'm confused. It is rather in this meaning that we should take the word masters. The higher their transcendence, the greater their superiority. When, on the other hand, they are said to rule us, this implies a kind of coordination with us. Indeed, the servants of the gods participate more completely in their gifts than mere subjects, since they become entirely theirs and add nothing of their own.
Right. Okay. So here, um, he makes a few points. So the first is that okay, so it seems like, the ruler he does what is best for his subjects, because that's, his function. That's what he's supposed to do. And not for himself. So the shepherd looks after the sheep, not for himself. And the king looks after his people and after his city and not himself. The gods, they do everything. The gods are not like this because the gods, as we saw in 29, take care of their inferiors, and this is what they do primarily, right? They want to do good for us. So it's wrong to say that they are masters in the sense that they don't take care of us, right? And they don't have our good, because what they do is they are good, and so they bestow good. However, they they make us good for the sake of themselves, right? They make us good for the sake of themselves, for the sake of the good that they are, right? So they are different values, and these values want to spread themselves. They want to grow in the world, and so they bestow this value on other things, right? Um, so that is the sense in which the gods are masters. The point of the master of saying that a master is not that he does not seek the good of his servant, that would be false, but that he seeks primarily his own good, because he is what is primarily good. Right? That that's the idea. So that's the first thing from the explanation. Maybe that in the case of the gods, the two functions run parallel to they do everything primarily for their own sake. And then there's another suggestion, which is that masters indicates the transcendence and rulers or rule indicates coordination. So the gods are masters precisely insofar as they totally transcend us. There are these, there are these henads, these goods, each of which transcends being, right? Um, However, insofar as they, these goods, they um, are primarily embodied by certain beings. So, for instance, the sun that we talked a lot about, the sun is embodied by that, luminous body in the sky. Then he's not totally transcendent. We are on the same plane as we're both bodies here, right? And that's the coordination here. There's one order, the world, that includes both of us, right? Of course, they're in a higher position in this order and things like that, but there is some kind of coordination, and that is what to say that they rule us. And um, then he says, it's better here to be a servant than just to be a someone ruled, a subject, because the servant belongs entirely to the gods, and that like what we ideally want to be entirely in the gods, uh, entirely belong to the gods, whereas the subject has something of his own still, right? Um, and and in that sense, calling them our masters is even, as it were, saying something better about them than calling us our rulers against the objection, right? The objection is you want to be a slave, that's a bad thing, calling them masters, that's bad. And it says no, it's actually better to be a slave to the god than to being merely ruled by him.
So,
So
all of this hinges on this idea that for God, something like this, like for us, or I guess for human kind of rulers and masters, there is a distinction or maybe a contradiction between your own good and the good of who you are for, or of their inferiors, and
yeah.
that contradiction or that distinction does not exist for gods. Because what it means to be a god is to be a good which bestows good on others. So in some sense, for themselves is the same I think as for us.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that also tells us that on the other side, to be the slave of a god or servant of the god is not doesn't have the negativity associated with being a slave for a human master, which because that means that you're you're losing some of your own good because you're about that person's good, and but being a slave for a god is really the opposite. It means entirely having your own good, which is caused by the god.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
Hmm.
so this
So again, this is something that makes the Cebes argument stronger, right?
right because you should not want to escape this. Okay,
Yeah.
but it's just a general thing.
Yeah.
Um, Somehow reminded of a story. I read a story that someone there were like two Hasidic rabbis that met, and one of them wanted to know if the other one is smart. So he said, "Look, I was in heaven, and there was a claim made that we shouldn't give good things to the people because although they claim to worship God, they really mean themselves, so they don't deserve anything." And he said, "But then I answered, how about God does the same? You give us good things, and you intend yourself also. So it would be fair." But anyways, that's what seems to be going on. It says that it doesn't work for us that well.
Yeah. It doesn't trust. Yeah.
I mean, there
Um,
might be if we claim that like some kind of like we said before, like if you worship God, then you also become a a cause in the same way. And then like if someone does something for other people in prayer or maybe in teaching or something like that, then it would be similar in where like your own good is the same as the good of your students and something like that.
yeah. The more you become divine, the more you identify yourself with the gods, the more also your own good becomes more expansive. Um, and yeah. Um,
I mean, also Plato's ideal ruler. I mean, not the philosopher who really doesn't want to be a ruler, but I guess some other kind of ideal ruler is one who identifies his own good with the good of the people.
Right, that's actually
Or
like the logic behind the no private property and things, right? Because then you what's yours is actually what belongs to the city. So what wanting your own good is going to be wanting the good of the city.
Mhm.
And and again, this is for Proclus, this is realized um in the heavens because the heavenly gods, those are the philosopher kings of this world, and the daimones are the guardians, the auxiliaries under them. So they really have everything in common. Hmm. Yeah, I wonder what it would be like to spell that out. Yeah, that's something that deserves thought. Since Proclus has all this stuff about us being children of the gods as children of specific gods, it's interesting to think that he thinks that the gods are actually the philosopher kings who don't have like private families. So that's something that needs to be worked out. Um, but yeah. So now in 33, 34, he talks about that comment about how Socrates was pleased by Cebes' argumentation, right? And he said, Cebes is always on the track of some arguments. He is certainly not willing to be at once convinced by what one says.
okay, right. The good teacher, 33. The good teacher is characterized by the critical insight that enables him to distinguish between the more superficial and the more pertinent questions. And by his delight in the latter, and by his delight in the latter, so he likes the better questions. The learner's qualifications are twofold: a critical insight to decide what deserves belief and what does not, and the eagerness to go more deeply into the truth. Okay.
So this is Socrates being pleased with Cebes' good question, and him saying that Cebes doesn't just accept anything, and he always wants more arguments.
Right. This is just like rephrasing what it says in the dialogue into like a didactic language.
Into a yeah, he's drawing a moral lesson from it. Yeah.
34. Questions ought to arise from the from the facts themselves, not from the opinions we have about them. That's number one. And from the heart of the matter, which is hidden from laymen, not from its obvious aspects. And number three, and they should be such as to please the expert, not the vulgar masses.
Right. So the translator quite cleverly points out that this is these are all things that are in the text, right? So when Socrates says that Cebes is always in the uh, on the track of no, I'm sorry, that he was pleased by Cebes' argumentation. The word here is pragmateia, which can be like what he busies himself with, but it's also cognate with pragma, thing, right? And so that's why he said by uh, questions ought to arise from the facts themselves. That's kind of like in German, there's a word called which is Sachlichkeit, which is, it pertains to the matter at hand,
Yeah,
right?
you would say in
And
Yiddish
so
like that.
yeah, and so
For the
he
Zach.
interprets uh, uh, Cebes was pleased by Cebes' argumentation. He was pleased by Cebes' Sachlichkeit, and and then from the heart of the matter and not what is uh, um, hidden from laymen. So he's seeking out the argument, and and they should be please the expert. Socrates liked it, right? Not the masses.
Hmm.
Um, and then he has a final point about what Simmias says. 35.
Okay. Now, 35. Each of the two avoids a part of the argument. Avoids. CB expressing the awkward point. I don't know what avoids mean. In the general form, like would a wise man, and Simmias applying the other one's reasoning to this particular instance.
Right. I mean, he could be. I think it could be a void in the sense that neither of them gives the full argument so that they don't uh, make it so strong. Because so that's what the comparing with Olympiodorus, the um, that's what the translator says. The intention is made clear by Olympiodorus out of consideration for Socrates. Cebes avoids mentioning Socrates' name, and Simmias, mentioning Socrates, does not speak of foolishness. I wonder though whether this ephylaxato means that each of them defends one part of the argument. One of them uh, uh, puts forth the major, the general premise, and the other one, the minor, right? The application to the particular instance. Um, but okay, we still have some
Okay.
time, so let's start with Socrates' answer. But let me get the text first. Um, so here, um, okay. Then Socrates says, "You are both justified in what you say, and I think you mean that I must make a defense against this as if I were in court." It's like for the dialogue, this was really important because this is what characterizes what Socrates says now, like now, and then it depends how long you take this defense as his second apology, right? He did the first apology, and the apology now is the apology before philosophers, before his students. You certainly must, said Simmias. Come then, he said, let me try to make my defense to you more convincing than it was to the jury. For Simmias and Cebes, I should be wrong not to resent dying if I did not believe that I should go first to other wise and good gods, and then to men who have died and are better than men here. Be assured that, as it is, I expect to join the company of good men. This last I would not altogether insist on, but if I insist on anything at all in these matters, it is that I shall not come to gods, is that I shall come to gods who are very good masters. That is why I am not so resentful, because I have good hope that some future awaits men after death, as we have been told for years, a much better future for the good than for the wicked. Right? So this picks up the one part of paragraph 27 of the two flaws in Cebes' arguments. He fails to define what kind of death a philosopher is willing to die. That will come later, right? Or came before with the discussion of necessity, but will come later when he talks about the ascetic practices and denying your body and things like that. And here he's the second thing. Secondly, that he forgets that in Hades too, there are gods who are good masters to us. So that's this section on Socrates' answer. So uh, let's um, let's see how he continues. Oh, it's also, of course, interesting to say that he's defending himself at court, because that's also, of course, what souls do in the Gorgias after they die. Right? They're judged. So you can continue with 36.
Okay. So 36 actually says that he can justly be expected to plead for himself as in a court of justice. Because when the soul chooses justice as its position, i.e., when it concerns itself with its own affairs, that's a justice for the soul, because justice is everything concerning himself with it.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes conscious of its separate life and even of its own immortality. For these are gifts the soul owes to itself. Okay.
Mm.
This is like the purificatory kind of justice, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly, because it's the separate life and what it gives to itself. Yeah.
his defense will carry more conviction with his disciples than with the judges, because with the latter we'll be able to use instruction to convince them, while with the former, meaning with the judges, or he had to
Yeah.
rely on persuasion.
Right. The although in the
The
sequence of the
latter and
text
former are
the
backward here,
judges,
yeah.
yeah, but the former because it happened before.
Okay.
Right.
What's persuasion? And persuasion meaning
So
something like rhetoric, which is not
yeah,
dialectical.
yeah. So it seems to be something like uh, yeah. Here he can. Um, he can use arguments that they can follow. Um, and the other, and yeah, here he says didaskalike, so teaching to convince them. Um, so I guess yeah, he can use philosophical doctrines to convince them, whereas before he could only use things that are commonly accepted, right? So there he doesn't argue that, and of course this is like a problem for Platonic scholarship. There he really doesn't seem to know what's going to happen after death, right? And he says, I prefer dying because who knows what that is. And whereas here he has, very clear ideas.
Right, so this line is like showing us that the apology is not really his opinion, or is not as really.
Right, and to solve possible like conflicts between the apology and the Phaedo. Yeah.
It's more convincing. This defense is the better one. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, right. 38. Dealing with the points raised by Cebes and Simmias, Socrates answered the first question, which was general in purport and used only the arguments of the gods, by assuring that he hopes to come to wise and good gods. To, to the personal arguments, which brings in the friends too, there's something about friends, replies that the men he will meet there are also better than those in this world.
Yeah, Simmias had said, you seem like you don't really care about leaving us, right?
Mhm.
So that's the
Uh,
the part about the
Leaving
friends.
us so lightly, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, because I have better friends there. You're not the best friends.
Yeah, yeah. Like even you would want to go hang out with the really cool kids.
Okay. Um, yeah, I guess I don't know what that means.
So I,
Like there
I
are, I guess in Hades, there's all these people, or however, wherever he thinks he's going.
Yeah, like Neoplatonically, there are these other souls. So I remember when we read the Life of Plotinus, um, Porphyry quotes this oracle that Emilius got about the post-mortem fate of Plotinus, and it talks about how he's up there with Pythagoras and these other people, and he's having a great time. And so he's saying something like that, and that would be like the idea. It's not just the gods, but they're the company of these pure souls and daimones up there. But what paragraph 38 is dealing with is also explaining why does like so like he the why he talks about the gods is clear. Why does he talk about the men there, right? About the human beings? That's unclear. And so he's saying, oh, it's because Simmias mentioned, the people.
Hmm. 39. Socrates says correctly and in accordance with the principles of religious practice that he will go to the gods. For it is right that the changeable should go to the changeless and the inferior to the superior. And this is why he will come also to better men. So it's not that they're coming to him, he's going to them.
Right. And in accordance with the principles of religious practice, that's hieratikos in Greek. And so hieratike is Damascus's term for theurgy and for religious practice more generally. So yeah, he's establishing this thing about and so it's like again where they're bringing theurgy to explain what Socrates is doing here.
Mhm. Um, 40. Union is union is brought about by similarity. Therefore, that's what union is, sort of. Therefore, the wise and good man, that is the philosopher, ennobled by virtue and knowledge, is united to the goodness and wisdom of the gods. Right. So that's what like the going to them means. So now, uh, goodness and the gods is the activity by which they provide for all things. Wisdom, that's what goodness is. Wisdom, that by which they know all things.
Right. So that's explaining why the gods are good to why he hopes to come to wise and good gods. It's not that union is similarity, but like similarity. So union here is sunafe, which is like almost like touching. And the idea then is being similar then allows the gods to act on you. Right? And then so that's like they touch you. So that's why brought about. Um, and and yeah, so he's justifying why does Socrates think that he'll come to good gods? You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting, that of course that Socrates is really self-aware about that he's been a good person all his life. Right? It's not this kind of worry about, oh, maybe I have these hidden sins or something like that. Although connected to that, the dialogue does end with, oh, we owe a cock to Asclepius, right? So maybe there's one last thing to purify or something like that. Yeah.
Um, yeah. Okay. Now, uh,
Now, in 41, he'll bring in a problem about another dialogue, the Phaedrus. Because here he called the
okay.
gods good and wise, but in the Phaedrus he called them beautiful, good and wise. So why is beauty not mentioned here? So that's a question that's raised in 41. First, we have one paragraph which is Proclus's answer, and the other which is Damascus's analysis.
Okay. This this doesn't connect to this. I mean, okay, let's see. Um, why did Plato add beauty in the Phaedrus, where he said the divine is beautiful, wise, and good? So he said wise, wisdom is knowledge, beauty, goodness is providing, or like providence, right? And
Exactly.
now, what is beauty? So in the Phaedrus, because the subject of that dialogue was love, there the way leading up to the good was beauty. Here it is wisdom. So according to this, the wisdom and beauty or love are both ways to the good. The good is the highest thing, which it should be. And
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that it's an idea that Proclus repeats elsewhere. That you have actually, there's also like a way proper to the good to go up to the good. So there are three things that connect us to the good, and so it's interesting here that so he divides the Phaedrus and has to do with love and therefore beauty, and the Phaedo to do with um, wisdom um and that connects with his previous point that nous just means is this cognitive um view of nous, right? So the point here is wisdom. um Damascus, however, is not satisfied with this.
mhm. But if so, why in the first place did he add wisdom in the Phaedrus? So because he talks about wisdom also. Secondly, why should the upward path in the present dialogue be especially that of wisdom? I mean, because he's talking about a foolish and a smart person, I guess. But rather, it deals with all the principles by which the soul is elevated, though in each case from the point of view of purification, or because it talks about all the virtues somewhere.
Yeah, later we will get to the catalog of all the virtues.
It is through goodness as well as through wisdom that we are lifted up to pure intelligence. This is back to the debate if the main thing is intelligence or there needs to be goodness also.
Yeah,
Um,
if it's just cognitive or if it's also intellect, or if it's also cognitive, yeah, repetitive.
yeah.
Mhm.
It is better to say that Socrates is discussing the providence that watches over us in Hades, that this is his reason for referring to the omniscience and the all embracing care of the gods. If there's to be, okay, and therefore, why is he missing beauty? We still don't know. If there's to be a question of omission at all, we should wonder why he does not mention the power of the gods in connection with their providence, an aspect added in the laws. The answer to this is that a detailed discussion of providence is outside the scope of the present argument, or that the notion of goodness includes everything that is good. For if it were powerless to do good, it would no longer be goodness. So that includes power. It doesn't answer something for beauty. Actually, in what follows, goodness is made to imply wisdom as well.
right. So the so there's the question about why do we not get a mention of beauty here? And then he said, well, why don't we get a discussion of wisdom in the Phaedrus? There's a parallel thing. And then the question is like, here he says it talks about the Phaedo talks about everything that leads the soul up, but from the point of view of purification. Um, and there and the point that Socrates is making here is just that after we die, there are also gods that take care of us. And so all he needs to establish is that they are good and that they are wise, right? If they weren't good, they wouldn't still be taking care of us after we die. And if they weren't wise, they probably couldn't do that. So the question is, it's like if he's missing anything at all, it's power because you need power to do these things. But maybe the his thing is like, oh, maybe power is included in goodness. And he says also that he later includes wisdom in goodness as well. So uh, that's that's the point. So he thinks that kind of that the so I think he agrees with Proclus that we have to give an explanation of why does he emphasize just these two divine um, attributes here, wisdom and goodness, to wise and good gods. But he thinks that the parallel with the Phaedrus is kind of like beside the point, because then you could also ask the Phaedrus, isn't there a discussion of wisdom things? Rather, we have to explain that these two attributes are discussed because of the question about like after we die, will we still have contact with gods? Um, okay, we still have some
Okay,
time.
a little more. So one more. 42. How does Socrates know that men in the hereafter are better? Okay. Is an inference from his own way of life. This should be understood in the precise sense that those who are nearer to the higher gods are themselves superior. Superior. It would be even better to put it this way. If they are strictly yonder, they do not incline towards the created world, because that's what it means to be there. If they do incline to creation, they're not yonder. And what Socrates says refers to those who are really there.
Right. That yonder is the Platinian there. Okay.
Right. I thought so. Okay.
Yeah. And so it just means like the intelligible. And so two ways is that he's going it is an inference from his own way of life is like it's curious to um I mean it's a curious thing to say for his friends. Uh, like I'm going to better people because I've been a better person than all of you. Um, and um, and then there are two reasons for this. That if um, if he's going to superior gods than here, because here he's been under gods that take care of the body, and he's going over to those that take care of the soul, so that those are superior, and so they must have superior people around them. Or, he's going there, and so they no longer have a connection uh, um, with the creative world. Um, Creation here can mean like the sublunary world. It's the Genesis, so it means the world of creation and destruction. Right? That's a creation.
Hmm.
Um, right. So let's stop here. Next week
Okay.
is the 19th, the 21st. Will you be okay then?
We'll see. I'll let you
Wanna-
know because I'm going
Okay.
away for the weekend and I don't know. I hope I'll be
Uh,
back, but I'll
okay.
find
Well,
out.
you let me know. If not, then maybe in the end of the year, at the 28th.
Yeah, I'll let you know on Friday.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Okay.
Okay, well, this was good. And yeah, have a nice trip.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.